And perfect. Let me just mute everyone, and you're all allowed to unmute yourselves as well. But just to start here, basically excited to welcome everybody into our Startup Grind Boston Fireside Chat. This is part of the funding month for Startup Grind, and we're really excited to have JD Weinstein from Oracle and Nick Spiller from Funding Camps as our featured presenters for the workshop today. I'm going to just share a quick video introduction, and this is Funding Month that's happening across all of the Startup Grind chapters. There's actually 500 different chapters around the world between the city chapters and university chapters in over 100 different countries. And it's Startup Grind started out as just a meetup group connecting, really hearing founder stories and inspiring the entrepreneurs to learn from speakers and apply lessons to their business, and then expanded across all these different chapters. The last 11 years, we host different conferences, conferences, virtual events, and have a startup membership program as well for more mentorship and ongoing access to different resources in there as well. Just going to share a quick intro, and this funding month is brought to you by Oracle and American Express, and excited to have them as partners.
Funding Month, presented with Oracle for Startups and American Express, recognizes the stories, lessons learned, and best practices shared by founders and funders around the world.
And in our local chapter, I have a quick shout out to a couple of our local sponsors and partners. So we have Brex, which is a corporate credit card cash management system, and they're offering a sign-up bonus for anybody that signs up within the next week. And you can check it out at brex.com/startupgrind. Special offers for our chapter, including lower minimums from the requirements you need to get support from them, as well as ShipQuid, which offers an experience to help you figure out who your ideal customer persona is, manage all the relationships, and get your whole team on the same page in terms of who you're reaching out to, where they fit in your pipeline, and and categorize the opportunities you need to go after in your business. Then we also have other partnerships with groups like Prepare for VCs, online community, several development groups and organizations from Zyk Technologies to 9 Series, and also local innovation centers and co-working spaces like Industrious and other spaces that when we return to in-person events, we host a lot of our events there, and also partner with some of the universities and bring some of these startup events into their space. And it's great environment. Encourage all of you to look through our startupgrind.boston, startupgrind.com/Boston page. I'll put it in the chat as well. And also, check out some of the partnerships and resources on there specifically designed for our startup community. And if there's anything you don't see or any areas we can help out with, feel free to reach out. And also within the chat here, it would be great, if anybody here, wants to introduce yourself, share a little bit about what you're working on in the chat box. We'll use it for Q&A as well. And also, it's going to be a workshop presentation format, followed by some, diving into the questions towards the end there as well. And again, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, ask any questions along the way, and really excited for the presentation here. I'm going to spotlight both JD and Nick here, and kick it over to you guys to kick things off.
All right, great. I'll share screen just a second, but thanks so much, Jason, for having us. Nick and I are excited to spend some time with y'all this 7 minutes into the afternoon in Beantown. Like Jason mentioned, I'm JD. I help lead our Oracle for Startups program in North America, specifically focused on the venture side of things, and really helping startups scale into the enterprise with large customers, integrations, our technology, and then being the intermediary between a number of investors, VCs, and our companies, both companies coming into Oracle and then also deal flow going to a number of our VC partners. We do a very, very tiny bit of investing kind of behind the scenes ourselves as well. I'm a native Bostonian, even though you can't hear it in my accent. So happy to be with all y'all today. Now in Austin, Texas, but born and raised early on in Needham, Mass. Go Sox, lifelong fan. And we'll talk a little bit. I'll let Nick introduce himself in a minute, but my experience, I've always worked in the venture field. I know Boston with y'all does not really fit too much, but Boston and Austin sometimes can get confused. So I've worked in a number of capacities, really supporting early stage entrepreneurs. So most recently with a large advertising conglomerate called WPP out of London, doing venture investing for them. And then also some investing in other smaller accelerators and firms here in Texas. And today, I think what's going to be interesting, Nick and I are going to talk to y'all about today around keys to running a successful fundraising strategy and pipeline. So there's often a lot to do and to be said about really how do I engage with an investor? How do I get their intention? How do I go through the meeting process? What do they look for in a company? What do I need to prove out? But also, equally as important is where do you even begin and how do you gear up this strategy and make it as efficient as possible? And so Nick and my hope today is that you guys or y'all will walk away with some really tangible insights and a strategy, or maybe some added tools to your toolkit while going through this process. So with that, Nick, I'll let you introduce yourself and I'll bring up the Prezzo here.
Awesome. Thank you, JD, and thanks for inviting me to be on the panel with you. And welcome, everybody. It's exciting to be here with you for Funding Month at Start Grind. My name is Nick Spiller. I'm a fundraising coach. I focus on helping increase the odds entrepreneurs raise money, and doing that pretty much by the exact way JD just said, making your funding process more efficient and hopefully helping you create a pipeline of investors as you're leading up to close that you can then close in parallel with essentially a surplus of investors. And that's kind of the focus I have. I do a lot of work around revenue-based financing, crowdfunding, angel funding, a background at Capital Factory where I led investor relations and helped over 100 companies raise money there that I worked with, and excited to be here and happy to go any direction we want. I'd say we prepared this at a high level and kind of walking through the framework and kind of key concepts of fundraising. But I think if anyone has anything specific they want to talk about, feel free to drop it in the chat or just take yourself off mute, and we can discuss anything you want.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to drop some questions or even chime in. Meant to be super more fun and easy. And so we'll run through this presentation for about 25 to 30 and then flip it over to the most interesting part, your questions. So Nick is, I've known Nick for a long time. He's one of the best in the biz when it comes to helping startups raise early funding. But as we kick into this, it'd be helpful, just setting the stage, these obviously terms are not exact. People define different tranches of fundraising in different ways. But if you all can see this and maybe just throw a number in terms of where you are in your fundraising process, we can gear the presentation a little bit towards that. So, pre-seed or angel funding, kind of getting your first checks in, call it under 500K. You could throw a number 1 in the chat. Seed stage, really first institutional round, right, up to a couple $1 million or so. Series A is going to be, that kind of 2 to 10 level, and then we call B and growth over 10. So I expect we'll be living in kind of 1 and 2 But some of the things we'll also talk about today will be relevant kind of across the board. Okay, awesome. So all around the map. So we'll spend some time, a little bit before getting into the nitty gritty of, hey, what does a tracking sheet and a CRM and a system look like for me to pipeline and profile investors and then actually go out and get money from them and back to building the business. So let's call these kind of fundraising isms that Nick and I have sort of preached for a while. And so right off the bat, we'll just mention that I'll run through this and then kind of have Nick dive in whenever you see fit. But venture investors are really in the business of selling money, right? And so, this is the money that you're going to get from any investor, the actual thing that they're offering, outside of advice and other things they try to differentiate themselves with, is the same commodity. And it's expensive, right? Like you are giving up a piece of your valuable company in return for somebody else's cash, and they're really offering all the same things. So make sure you understand that kind of going into things. Often, right, at the end of the day, the best check is the one that gets signed. And so you've got to do what you need to do to get money in the bank. But at the same time, think of yourselves in the power position as you have a really unique company that you're changing the game with. They are not all that differentiated. The next thing is investors invest in lines, not dots. And so this is one of my favorite sort of quotes and metaphors, which is really what we're going to run through on this slide today, which is, very rarely does it happen that you show up to investor meeting, an angel meeting, or early VC meeting, called General Catalyst or somewhere in the backyard there, where they go, great, what's your bank account information? Can I wire the check over to you? I enjoyed meeting you, Jason or Yev. We'll see you next time. Here's the money. Like maybe once in a blue moon, you could get that to work, but oftentimes really every time you meet an investor, this is going to be a lengthy process, called anywhere from 3 months to 12 months or even longer. And every time you meet is a new data point. Every time that you have new information that you're sharing with them, whether it's growth metrics or you came through a hardship and you got the business back on track, these are, what they're looking to invest in are the lines that connect all these data points and these dots. So your thinking patterns, how you communicate, your growth, right? So very much so think of this as we hear about it as a long-term game, and this could be a 10-year relationship, but I think this is also really good perspective to understand, it's not necessarily just, the business from a whole that they're evaluating. They're actually evaluating my execution, my ability to execute over time, and how do we grow a relationship together. Moving right down here. So every tall skyscraper needs a strong foundation. And so this is, again, quite obvious, but if you're building one of the massive, right, if we look at a Prudential Center or something, and early days, if that went a little bit to the right and leaned, everything that you build on top of that is probably gonna crash and burn pretty quickly. And so it is very, very important to focus on a strong foundation, really great partners early on, because if not, and the terms are wonky or they, manipulate your board or whatever it is, it's going to be very, very difficult to operate from that. So, again, best way to do this, we'll talk more about this later on, is, really feeling out and talking to other companies that a particular investor has invested in, both ones that have been successful or unsuccessful, will give you a lot of insight into how they operate.
And I would just add quickly that this means it's really helpful if you can put yourself in a position to operate indefinitely until you find that perfect investor, because you just don't know when they're going to come, right? And so I think that's another key point, and so you don't want to get forced into a relationship with an investor too soon before you know them, and so yeah, I think if you're in a situation where, hey, we are going to run out of money in a couple months, and even before you have that funding where you're kind of able to burn that cash, I think you're really running a risk that you're either going to get a bad investor or no investor. Whereas if you can kind of find this spot where you're can keep going and stay alive for as long as you need until that investor, and just slowly hit milestones until that investor comes along, that's where you really get to sit back and take your pick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a milestone based business, right? In that of venture capital. Nick, you want me to keep breezing through these, or you want to pop in for the next couple?
Yeah, I can take a couple. Ask for money, get advice. Ask for advice, get money. I think this is kind of the number one piece of advice that you hear around fundraising, and I think it goes back to investors are looking for a lot of things on top of a financial return when they're investing, right? And ultimately they want to be a valued piece of your team. They want to have a relationship with you. They want to, be more than money. And so I think when you go into it, asking for advice and really involving them in problem solving and project management, like light project management in your company, that's where you really get them to fall in love. And if you have someone that falls in love and they have the capacity to invest and they have the money, then when the opportunity comes, like why wouldn't they, right? And so and then don't get caught up in all the glitz, glamour, and headlines. There's a lot of companies that get a lot of attention, are household names that are terrible investments. And like kind of WeWork's the big one. That documentary just came out, kind of shows that just because it was an awesome place to work doesn't mean it's exactly a great return for the investors. And you can have a great company that impacts the world and goes down in history without having a good investment, right? And I think usually that goes when the founder ends up wanting a little bit more than just success for the company, but they want to get famous themselves or things like that. It also just gets distracting and wear you down.
It's also really quickly on that one, Nick, it's true that more venture money, more venture dollars, it's going into the ecosystem, right, more than ever before. And so I think some crazy number, right, like we already have beat the amount of venture capital dollars in the States here for all of 2020 in the first quarter of 21. And so, you may see that headlines that every single day people are getting millions or billions of dollars of funding. That money is actually going into fewer companies at the growth stages. And so make no mistake, this is still a very, very difficult business, and it's really hard to raise funds. And so you all are the superheroes for going out there and, building businesses to change the world in one way, shape, or form. But just don't get too caught up with what you're seeing out there. There's a lot of sort of Shark Tank clickbait. We see this stuff day in and day out, and focus on the core fundamentals of your business. If you do that and build something successful, these things will find you later. And then, and then the last piece Nick and I have down here is really asking the question of, Nick alluded to some of the many ways that you can raise funding earlier on. Venture capital is one small avenue, and it's the one that's most popular, that you all are hearing about and probably gets talked about the most. But like, why do you even need to raise money? Why are you raising in the first place? Make sure that question is super clear, in that, you want to hire, right, 2 developers to build out this MVP to prove X, Y, and Z out, or for this growth strategy. The quote down here is from, Bill Gurley often references this, a very well-known VC from Benchmark, which is, limited, bootstrapping, or not using venture capital with limited resources leads to better decision-making, and then therefore better outcomes. And so actually, right, we look at Theranos or WeWork or all these stories where just throw money at the problem and sort of hope for the best doesn't always work, right? Sometimes it can solve things for a certain amount of time, but actually getting through things with just a limited amount of resources, like, you don't have a choice. You have to be extremely efficient with your decision making.
Yeah, I think the other important thing on that is why are you actually doing this? You know, and not as the CEO of the company, but you as an entrepreneur and as an individual, is your purpose like truly to build a company that impacts the world, or is it, something else, right? Is it, I want to see this product exist, or I want to see this place exist, or, I want to, create a business that can support my family and help them go to college, or, whatever it is. I think so many people get tied up into the reasons that investors want you to start companies. And there's this idea of, this person who's willing to give it all up for the company and go all in and, build the next Facebook and all that. And that's like admirable. And, I'll certainly, can get behind that. But, I don't think you want to be disingenuous believing that, right? And because you're going to sign yourself up for a shit show. And it's like, ask yourself, like, if you're not really in love with the company, like, do you want to be Mark Zuckerberg, right? When all these big, situations come day in, day out, like, it's not exactly a fun situation. So yeah, I think have that internal reflection on what you really want to do in your company. So yeah. Pass it back.
If you could continue on this route, because you referenced this earlier, right? Not only, how much do I need? What kind of business do I want to grow, right? In venture capital, they need to look for outsized returns, right? The multi-billion-dollar winners. And so oftentimes when you're talking to institutional investors, you better know how to answer those questions. There are a lot of different fundraising options. And so, Nick can go into detail on this, but from crowdfunding, syndicates, from AngelList, Republic, revenue-based financing, grants, so on and so forth. I know it's your specialty, Nick, so I'll let you chime in on it.
Yeah, I think it depending on the type of business you have, there can be a lot of other options than VC, right? And especially, I guess, if you are one of the companies who keeps hearing that you're not a fit for VC or you're too early for VC, there are other options out there, especially you have cash flow, right? And so, crowdfunding is great, where you can raise from a lot of people. And there's been new regulations in the equity crowdfunding campaign, like arena from the SEC, to essentially allow you to raise more money through crowdfunding now. And so that's a bigger option. And also just rewards-based crowdfunding. If you have a physical product, it's a very good way to pre-sell your product, right? And like it's other things, revenue-based financing. So companies that have consistent good margins, good revenue can potentially take investment and then repay investors a percentage of the revenues on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, instead of giving up equity and taking that dilution. That can be a little bit more attractive to investors who, for companies that have strong cash flow, but maybe not as high growth potential, right? And so I've got a strong business, but maybe it's not going to be something that I can sell to Oracle one day. You can use revenue-based financing in that situation, since the equity isn't as attractive, right? And I think angel investors are, there used to be a day where you could fully fund a company from an angel and from a group of angels, right? And you would maybe take $2 to $5 million total. You'd grow to $10 to $15 million in revenue, and then you'd sell for 30 to 50 million bucks, right? And that was a home run back then. And today, that if you have VCs involved, that's really not even a base hit, right? And so, I think there's an opportunity for people to engage angels that way, and because essentially it's becoming very hard for an angel investor to invest in these high growth companies that end up raising 150, 350 million dollars when they've just got 25, 50K to invest at a time, right? And so I think you can get some angels together to kind of bring it down to earth and say, hey, we see an opportunity to grow to 5, 10 million in revenue. And then sell to maybe a private equity firm for 2-3x revenue multiple, 30 million bucks, which if you set it up right and you're not valued super high up front, you're not, going into your first round with a, 8 million pre-money valuation, but you have it, a little bit more down to earth, you can, still make that that deal work for your investors. So there's a lot you can do. Debt also is another thing. Like once you have some cash flow, like a lot of like the payments platforms, like online lenders, that stuff's all taken off and can be really easy to get. And then like the best way to fundraise of all is to get revenue, right? And so if you can ever just go sell your product and get more revenue, that's the best way to begin. So my computer's about to die. I'm just going to step away for a second and get the charger.
No problem. So, the main takeaway I always pitch to people too is understand that you're raising money from humans, not firms. And and we're seeing this much more become a trend of the solo capitalists. And so, when you're pitching, make sure that you're tailoring your presentation and your investor pitch towards the particular partner and the companies they've invested in or their mission, as opposed to, oh, I heard this big fancy firm likes X, Y, and Z. So at the end of the day, a lot of different variations. We can dive into that deeper. But for now, we're going to finally get right into sort of the how do I even start and how to target my investors. So, there's a couple things here before in the next slide, we'll run through some of the more charts and diagrams as to actually how to categorize and track the investors that you want to talk to. But they understand, most of this is going to be really focused on the early stage VCs, also angels as well. But this is the first two go hand in hand together. Okay, so you're going to often find some investors are going to be more value investors. They like to see more things proven out. They take less risk, so they're less risk averse, and so over time, they want to see you've proven out a certain amount of metrics. So money that's coming in, your monthly recurring revenue has grown at this amount. You have X amount of users on the platform for so many days. And those are typically going to be price sensitive investors, right? So they're going to be bargaining for the best term sheets. On the other side of things, and there's a mixture, everything in between, are going to be more unicorn investors, which is really where the venture capital model falls, which is, and these are going to be much more price insensitive. So this is what you hear about in the Valley, where people are getting, $20 million seed checks and that's it. So the other pieces, and so much more insensitive. What was I going to say on unicorns? Now, the way that venture capital businesses work, understand that rather than the value investors where maybe you're pitching to take a portion, hey, if we can only capture 1% of this particular market, that is kind of taking away market share from what already exists. It's much easier to conceptualize. It's much less risky, as opposed to sort of your unicorns where we look at an Airbnb or an Uber, where in fact, those markets didn't exist. And so really in that scenario, this is 0 to 1 that Peter Thiel pitches. You're actually going out and creating the market and changing human behavior to get there. And so figure out which bucket that you're in, or rather yet, which investor is targeting what. A couple other things, just, being, some are going to be mission driven. So this doesn't necessarily mean that it's only family foundations and they're nonprofits. There are plenty of sort of impact investors that we see now. And so pay attention to that. We have a lot more focus on climate change and sustainability efforts. And even if your whole mission isn't a sustainability company, there may be aspects of what you do that apply to that. And so make sure that you're drawing all these different links that you can. And the last thing that we've got down here that I'll just run into and ask Nick if he's got anything to add is founder criteria. So sometimes there are just non-negotiables when they're evaluating founders. What do they look for? You can start on the website. I'll come back. There's an investor here that started Austin Ventures in Texas, Bill Wood, that he won't invest in a company. It is a very successful track record without them coming to a near-death experience. Not near death in human life, but a near company death experience. Meaning, have you gone through a founder divorce and gotten back on track? Have you ran out of money and, hey, we can't make payroll for 15 days, but we've pulled it together. We got cash in the bank, customers paid us, and we're back at it. Because there are going to be many more of these situations. And so if you've proven at least one of them out, I think it comes over a huge hurdle for a number of investors that understand, right? The ride is, right? It's never just a fine up and to the right. Nick, do you have anything to add on those couple points?
Yeah, and I think we have a couple questions to catch up on in the chat we can hit. I think the other, again, going back to maybe companies that don't have a bunch of investors chasing after them, and you're kind of just maybe not having the easiest time fundraising, some kind of other strategies, or one key strategy I kind of push people to, all this stuff still applies, but is really maybe instead of trying to find the most active investor that's like invested the most in your space, go find a senior executive in your space who could be an investor, but maybe isn't as active, right? And like I found there's all of these people like in the industry that are either on the board or executives or senior executives at the large at the Oracles or at the PepsiCo, and there's in a lot of ways those people have made it to these very cush spots. They've got big teams under them. They've got a good salary, and they get your industry, and so yeah, that could be kind of an alternative option, and there's just less people pitching them, right? If you go down to your Boston Angel Network or Central Texas Angel Network, like all the entrepreneurs are going there, so the competition is higher, right? But if you kind of go to where maybe less people are pitching, and you find, okay, these are people that get get the questions, get get the vision, it can make more sense. So that's one of my tips on profiling investors. And then LinkedIn's a really helpful tool at this, and you kind of get the pro version. You can filter for people that have angel investor in their headline, and that's usually a pretty good sign that they're kind of open to meeting people and identify as an angel.
That's great. Let's do this. We'll run through just the last slide here, might be one or two, and then flip over to questions for y'all. But I want to make sure we at least cover kind of at least a tactical strategy as to, a starter. Anyway, if you're not already doing something, everyone has their own systems and chooses what works for them. But we wanted to go through, okay, now we've set the stage. We've decided after all that, JD and Nick, hey, I still want to raise money. I'm picking up what you're putting down. We want to go the venture route. We're early stage, we're seed stage. I know some investors in my network, but I don't know others. Where do I start from a pipeline perspective? So that's going to be the first chart here. And then how do I track maybe money coming in from a CRM? And so we, credit to Techstars that has a really great toolkit they put together for that second chart too. So, quickly running through this, again, there's a lot of different ways to think about this, and there's a lot of different data that you may put in here. This is kind of a light version that I've seen what's worked really well if you're at the earliest stage. And again, remember, this is really effective. I think one, it helps you understand the investors that you're pitching, who might be a great fit, who may not be. And so you can, capture all this data in one centralized repository. But also the goal of this is just to make your fundraising experience as efficient and quick as possible. Some people love this. Most people hate it. You want to run your business, you've got to go through this. It comes with, comes with the charge. So, interest level right off the bat, we'll come to that. A name of a partner, from a VC firm. Seniority is an interesting one because many times you'll meet an analyst or an associate level kind of person at some of these larger firms, especially, and understand that's a great entry point into the firm. But those folks, similar to at a large company that you want to be your customer, just because you have kind of someone in the mid-level that really is passionate about your business and your product, they may not be a key decision maker. And so make sure that at some point, probably into the third meeting, if you don't already have a key decision maker that's taken a look at this, that's a big flag to look at. just classifying, is this a really hot lead? Did it come from somebody, that I worked at another company with, and we did great things at Pfizer together, and now they're funded by this investor? An introduction from them is going to be hold a ton of weight, and so that's going to be in the hot category. Why you fit in their thesis, and so definitely referencing portfolio companies. If they're investing in marketplaces, you're a marketplace business, you have similar dynamics to portfolio company A or B. Certainly reference that and capture that down. Intros. We hear a lot about the warm intros, and while VCs often advertise, hey, we're open for business, Justin, I see you there, like, send us a cold email. It's going to get looked at. We look at a lot of these things the same way. We try not to have bias. In reality, the strong majority of companies that investors are investing in are in relationships and people that they've known and built over time. And so either they've known them from decades past or companies past they've been involved with, or perhaps you're meeting them and coming into this network and getting to know them into this invest in lines, not dots scenario. And so still coming from a reputable person is the best case scenario, and actually a portfolio company that someone's invested in, I think is one of the best intros you can get. And then, notes and then meeting data, right? What do you need to do? The last thing I'll just conclude with on this is how many folks, and maybe you'll just smile and laugh to yourself, often get the answer from investors that say, hey, Kai, this is really great. We, congrats on everything you've built so far. It looks like it's tracking the right direction. You're a little bit too early for us. So, we got to say no right now, but come back to us when you get a little bit later and have some more traction. Has anyone ever, for those that are on video, anybody ever heard that feedback before? Okay. So the best answer that you can give to that, or sort of a comeback question in a very polite manner, is, hey, what is it that you'd like to see to make this an investable business or to be interesting to you? And that doesn't mean that they're right with what they want to see in your business, but what that does mean is you can pull together data from a lot of different investors of what they're wanting to see. Is it, hey, we want 10,000 more users on the platform? Is it, we want $5,000 in monthly recurring revenue, or this growth rate, or this time on the platform? The more specific you can get with that, it gives you something to go off of, and also to go back to the partner when you went ahead and hit that and saying, hey, we did what you told us to, like, let's talk. Very rarely in investing roles that I've had would founders do this, and the ones that did, it was a huge green check mark next to them. And we'll just touch on this so I can flip over to Nick and we'll open to questions. But that is, how do I get into the investors? How do I track and target investors and run my pipeline? The second piece of this is, how do I track the money that's coming to the bank? We all know somebody has not invested in your company until you see the dollars in your physical bank account. There are many parts in the process beforehand where they go, sounds great, count me in, yeah, let me give you $25,000. I love what you're doing. Okay, great, that's advancing. Many people have horror stories about this. So this is what this is created to do. New people coming in, okay, if they said that they're interested, maybe didn't give a formal amount. Now we've soft circled them. They said 25K, committed, they've now sent maybe an email agreement saying we now have, we agree to 25K. The legal and paperwork, now they've signed the legal documents to do that. And then of course, wired into the account. So this is a little bit on how do I track this and just set things up from the beginning for those that don't have a similar system in place, what we've seen work best. And so hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight there. Nick, I'll kick over to you if you've got anything to add. Otherwise, I think it's a great time to unlock some questions.
Yeah, this is one of the most important parts. You can imagine as you go on, and especially when things go well, there's gonna be a lot of investors, a lot of conversations. And so having it tracked is gonna be a must. And I promise it's gonna be uncomfortable when you forgot something or forgot how much, and lo and behold, they wanted to invest 50, but you just sent the docs for 25. I think the tough thing, and one of Kareem's questions is, talks about, how do you get the information on investors, right? And it's like really, and there's a lot, you can get a little bit online, but honestly, a lot of the most important information you will need to solicit directly in your introduction calls, and as much as they're going to be asking you questions, you should be asking investors questions, and you should be logging that. And so I think the other dimension that is involved with the system, but maybe not shown here, is where are you logging the notes from the calls, and like what are and usually there's probably like 10 different properties on investors that you're looking for, and you can come up with your own system, or find one. If you're on any like mentoring platforms, you can see all the different tags and stuff. But yeah, it's like, okay, well, what size investments do they write? How many investments do they make per year? What does their typical due diligence process look like? What type of business models do they like? Like, what valuations do they invest at? Do they like convertible notes, or do they like safes, right? And like, you kind of want to find what are the most important questions, and as much as they're going to be talking to you and you're pitching, you want to interview them, and essentially it's this discovery process of, does your investment strategy, your fundraising strategy, align with their investment criteria, right, of what they want to invest in. And it's as simple as that, is kind of getting to it. It's like, okay, well, it looks like we're a fit, why don't you invest? Or it's like, oh, maybe not. So yeah, that's what I'd add here, but otherwise it's important stuff. I use HubSpot to do this. If you're already in a CRM, it's very easy to just add another sales pipeline. You can you kind of have pipelines for different products. You can just make one for an investor, and you can add a property, or you can add a new persona type, right? And so you might have a customer persona, an advisor persona, and then you add an investor persona to the contacts. So you can then pull a list of your investors right within your current CRM. But at the same time, if you don't already have a CRM, it's probably just enough to do your stuff in a spreadsheet like this. Just make sure you're logging your notes and tracking it, right?
This should look very similar to your sales development process. And so don't tell any investors we're sharing this part with you, but like, you can treat them as if, right, they're potential customers. And so if you're having some success on that side of the business, this is very, very similar. You should be using those tactics. Jason and Yev, I've been monitoring the chat a little bit as we dive in, but maybe if you have done a better job, you can help us kind of get to the first questions and the most interesting ones.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can jump back.
No, that was of course. Yeah, no, great presentation. And yeah, we do have some questions that came in already. And yeah, feel free to continue submitting and asking questions here as well. Yeah, one from John on, for pre-revenue, pre-seed, tech companies, what are some of the metrics that you can still use to show in terms of traction to investors?
Yeah, this is an important question. Hey, if we're not making $10,000 of MRR and we want to grow it to 15,000, we're earlier than that. How do we show growth and interesting metrics to investors? So some of that's for you to decide and understand your business as to how that's going to make money at some point. And some of it you can certainly solicit, like I mentioned, from investors. What would they like to see to make this an interesting business? I think at the earliest stage, you want to show that there's extreme interest in your product. And so even just doing surveys or very manual types of scenarios, customer discovery stages of, we talked to 100 customers and, kind of went through what's the most they'd be willing to pay for this, how large is the pain point. 93 came back and said, we're ready to sign up for the platform tomorrow. That's pretty strong data that we're signaling. I think after that, right, number of users and getting folks very engaged and time on screen, where it might have some negative connotation, but still very much engagement is top of the line here. Nick, you have anything else that that you think about for pre-revenue companies showing traction?
Recruiting people to your team can be considered traction, and one of the easiest ways to go from investable to not investable is to just add someone really awesome to your team. Or same thing goes. Your advisory board is often kind of extension of that. Pre-sales, LOIs. People pay for stuff up front. And it surprises me at how many entrepreneurs refuse to try to get that done, right? And so, even if it's only a portion or anything that's in writing, even if it's just like a letter of intent, better yet, pre-sales. It's the other part where equity or rewards crowdfunding, the non-equity crowdfunding can come into play. And so if you have, selling a book or selling any type of pre-launch product, and it doesn't work as well with like software stuff, but not that it can't, like if you have an audience, especially, but yeah, like that's an awesome environment. You can go do that and get credibility. And if you bring traction early on, then it can tap into the Kickstarter community and you get more there. So that's some things you can do. And I think maybe like the best thing to say is like what not to do is like, just don't find yourself beating down the door of investors hearing you need more traction and continue just beating down the door of investors, right? Like go spend time building traction, right? And like sometimes entrepreneurs should just face it's not time to raise money yet. And you got to go find some small scrappy thing to do to get it to the next level, and then maybe try it a little bit again, right?
Cool.
I think that's great advice. And then tying in actually two of Justin's questions. So, on one side, how important is it to focus on working with investors that have gone into your space in the past? And then what are some of the questions, you should be asking that are definitely be asking in any of those investor meetings you go into?
It's a good question. I think it can help to have someone from your industry. I don't think it's required by any means. It's more, I think, ask your question, is this person going to cause me headaches? And I think people in your industry that have a lot of experience can be super helpful, but they also might be able to cause a lot more headaches. And kind of rule number one of investing that a lot of investors forget is do no harm, right? And so I think that's what you want to kind of get a feeling on. At the end of the day, it's just your intuition and your gut you got to go with on the people. But yeah, I think it's less about maybe the industry and their experience and more just, do they understand how to build a startup? Do they understand how to build a business? Like, do they grasp the basics of our venture? Because I think, like the worst thing is just having an investor that thinks they know that like what's going on, but they're just not aligned with the founder. And then essentially when you don't have that alignment is when conflicts come up and progress goes down.
And then we also had a couple questions around the location. So both, and then this might have changed during pre-COVID to now. So how important do you see, the location of both the startup and the investors you're pitching in the seeking out your fundraising round?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly still important. So I think, COVID hit an interesting dynamic in businesses and, had to change for the long haul. And so you see a lot more distributed workforces. I know my company, our small enterprise software company, Oracle, we're full remote for now and plan on staying that way for at least the time being before we figure out sort of a hybrid model. Now, in terms of the investment landscape, we see a little bit more, certainly during COVID, being done in terms of you don't have to meet the actual founders. We can just meet over video and Zoom, and that's making it much more accessible. I think in terms of regions, it's still folks like to, at the earliest stages, invest in their backyard. When it comes to institutional money, they're looking for the best deal flow and best opportunities. So I think they're probably more open. The answer to this, though, like if you're in the EMEA region, you probably want to, start with Europe, or target, let's say US-based investors that have invested a number of times in European seed stage companies. So it doesn't mean, I wouldn't say try to change the landscape. More comfortable people want to be in the backyard from home, but at the same time, I would just do your research on where people's appetites are for that. The one thing just to pay attention to is kind of legal structure. So if you are abroad and plan on doing anything within the US, you will need to have a Delaware C Corp, essentially. Fairly easy to set up another division or conversion or something, but in terms of investors, we'll leave it at that.
Cool. Great. And then we had a question around the, some of the crowdfunding, crowdfunding ideas you guys had mentioned. So how far along should a company be, or like what needs to be set up and in place before somebody tries to do a crowdfunding campaign?
Yeah. The most useful thing to have going into a crowdfunding campaign is a loyal audience, and so I think that's what's most helpful. And, we look at kind of the influencer phenomenon, people that have, 100,000 followers, in normal fundraising, those folks can't participate because you have to be an accredited investor. And so, with crowdfunding, you're able to solicit investment from non-accredited investors, just everyday people, and so you can partner with influencers or consumer brands do very well on crowdfunding because they this is a way for their customers to buy a piece of the company and invest. Not that you have to have that. I think certainly if you're trying to do it early pre-seed phases where you're, maybe pre-product or just barely post-launch, it's going to be tough to do it as a B2B company, or just haven't seen it as much. But if you're a B2B software company or just any type of B2B company, once you do have some traction, it's possible to raise on crowdfunding. But yeah, I think the companies that do very well are the consumer packaged goods, the physical products, the hardware stuff that just, that you can touch and feel and you actually get a piece of it. And yeah.
There's, one more piece on that where there's a couple different types of crowdfunding, right? There's kind of the ones where physical products where people are just paying up front. They're not getting any equity in your business. And then there's more like we've seen Republic and AngelList syndicates and things come up where people are actually investing for equity in your business. Both are interesting options. In terms of other sort of great things maybe to look at, like if we look around at a lot of really great companies that innovate today, they all have launch conferences or things around this. So like looking at what Apple does, or Tesla is probably the best example of this, right? Like go look at how they launched the Cybertruck. If you're in boring software or something, you don't have something as sexy, go pay attention to Salesforce. What they do at their Dreamforce or Dreamworld is second to none. And so there's a lot to learn as to how do you drive up really a lot of excitement around sometimes otherwise boring things. And help model your crowdfunding campaigns off those kinds of those interactions. What else we got? I know we're
and then how do you
close, Jason?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just do one last question. So, how do you view approaching the corporate side? A lot of the corporations, even yeah, you guys are doing a lot of work at Oracle with startups, and there's been a lot more companies focusing on either accelerating startups or investing in companies. As a early stage startup, is there a difference in how you pitch a corporate venture fund versus a traditional venture fund?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. And I think they're, just taking a step back, a lot of really amazing ways to interact with corporates. And there's a lot of value and money and dollars and revenue to be unlocked. And so there's a couple things, one, there's just tackling corporate innovation departments, accelerators, studios, the likes of these things where, hey, how do I just get in with a corporate, maybe call them a partner, be able to try out a POC, things like this. The other side that's probably more relevant to our conversation here is corporate venture capital funds. And most every large Fortune 500 now has a separate fund that they have as part of their business now. And so I think they can be really, really great and strong. I mean, in terms of how to pitch them, you want to explore and figure out, are they returns focused, priority number one, or is it some sort of strategic initiative within the business? So maybe, for example, in Oracle, our goal is really to get new companies to leverage our cloud technology. So understanding and knowing that, you would want to explore, how do you integrate, what can you build with Oracle Cloud before coming in and talking to us. The flip side of that you want to really be careful of is understand that, just because having Microsoft Ventures or something, M12 on your cap table can look strong and signal really well to some companies. Microsoft has competitors, and so you may be ruling yourself out in that nature too. So a couple kind of food for thought things there.
I appreciate that. And then to wrap things up here, on our side, definitely follow us at Startup Grind Boss, BOS, on social media, and we'll be sending out a follow-up newsletter with the recording to go back and check out as well. And then we'd love to hear JD and Nick, for people either interested in following up with you or with Oracle for startups and funding camps, where should they go to follow along and check out more information?
Nick, you can lead.
All right. I am always happy to connect with entrepreneurs just one-on-one. I'm easy to reach on LinkedIn. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I also have a podcast on Spotify and Apple Music called Beta Business that comes out weekly, and it's all about the essential podcast for first-time entrepreneurs. And we have a Clubhouse club as well. If you're on Clubhouse, we do multiple rooms a week there. You can search as Beta Business. So, all right. Thank you for having everybody.
Thanks, y'all. I'm throwing a couple things in the chat. I'm easy to reach on LinkedIn as well. You've got my name, my email's down there. And if you want to learn more about our program, really helping startups unlock the enterprise, it's just oracle.com/startup. So always happy to chat about those things or any of the stuff we talked about today. But thanks again, Jason, for hosting us, and enjoyed spend the at least middle of the afternoon with y'all.
Appreciate it. Yeah, great presentation. Thanks everyone for coming out, and excited. If there's any additional ways we can all help out, feel free to shoot us a message. But yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.